What if I told you that a great painting is like a map, and the artist secretly decides where your eye will go first, second, and last? And what if I could show you how that works from inside a painting? Today, let's step inside the composition of the greatest paintings and walk through the hidden geometry that makes the greatest artworks feel alive, intentional, and unforgettable. Let's do this. This right here is the focus point. It's the star of the show. It's the one thing that the artist really wants you to look at. Every painting needs a reason to exist, right? An idea that justifies its existence. This is your focus point, the center of interest that carries the emotional or narrative weight of the whole painting. There can be multiple focus points if there is a narrative storyline, but the idea is always the same. This is where the eye is supposed to look at as a priority. And when you have a blank canvas full of empty space like this one, the first question you have to ask yourself is, where do you place your main focus point? Given the space of the rectangle, some spots are better than others. Like this one is better than this point, and this one is better than this one. This is where we might need geometry to help us decide and guide our inspiration. Old masters placed their focus points very carefully using geometry. So you have the golden ratio, the medians, the symmetry, or the intersections of some of the diagonals with other lines to anchor the focus points. Let's take the golden ratio, for example. And here, I know it would take too long to explore this complicated notion in detail, so you'll just have to trust me on that. Now, real quick before we move on to the next painting, let me show you the description box. Here is where you can join our Discord community. It's free. Here's where you can find my oil painting courses. Here's where you have to click if you want to join my Patreon. And here's where you have to click if you want to subscribe to our amazing newsletter. If you follow the golden ratio in the geometry of your painting, you will get a Fibonacci spiral, that's what it's called, that might end up on a focus point that would be approximately here. And this area is great real estate for your main focus point. You can place an eye or the face of your main character around here and it will work beautifully. And if you know me, you know that I'm normally a golden ratio skeptic, as I don't think that it adds a lot compared to what we'll see next, like the rule of thirds. But I have to admit that this point is perfectly placed within the space of the rectangle, and that the golden rectangle itself is very pleasant and well proportioned. But it doesn't have to be all about the golden ratio. The thirds are also great positioning. Around this line, from this intersection to the next, any point would be a great focus point. And obviously, the crossing of the thirds is also a perfect location. This is now known as the rule of thirds. It wasn't formally known as such by the old masters back in the days, but you can see that a lot of them still used such a position, more or less. Sometimes ideas float around before they're properly formalized, and a lot of the geniuses of the past could spontaneously figure out that this kind of placement works well. I personally recommend that you use the thirds, not necessarily the golden ratio. They're not that far away from each other, and the thirds just look great for focus points. They're really going to be very easy to implement, and they're going to create some beautiful compositions. One key thing to remember is to just pick one and make the others secondary, or even better, completely empty. A focus point has to be given priority, and even though you have 4 available spots, you don't want to use them all at the same time. In a great painting, there are always multiple interesting spots. That's fine, but you, as the artist, you need to choose which one leads and make the others support or step back. So remember to pick a focus point, and the geometry can help. But here, there's something very important to keep in mind. We're talking about creative structure, not mathematical precision. It's not about cutting your model's head off just to make it fit in a perfect square. That would be kind of stupid. These compositional grids, these rules, they are inspirations, right? They're not even rules. So they help you organize your movement, the tension, the location of your focus points. But the goal is never to be rigid. It's always flow first, realism first. And even with the idea of a focus point, it's helpful to think of it less like a bullseye and more like a center of gravity. That's the key here. It's a center of gravity. Key elements orbit around it. Some pull more attention, some less, and it doesn't have to be pinpoint accurate. It has to be kind of around, which is why I like to call it a focus zone rather than a focus point, because it's not necessarily a precise location. It's more an area where things might look good and might be well placed. And if you really want to single out a point, it's more a center of gravity, and the other key elements will sort of orbit around it. So before painting, here's what you do. You ask yourself, what is my center of gravity? Then you nudge everything else to support it, even if it's just slightly off center. Don't be too rigid. Give it this subtle imbalance that often makes the image feel more alive. And talking about making the image feel alive, remember this last thing about focus points. Dead center is dead. You want to avoid the dead center of your canvas. It's usually an area that's better left empty. Once we've established our focus point, the next question is, how does the eye get there? Let's talk about lines, and not the obvious ones, like a line that an artist actually traces on the painting, but the more subtle line, the tilt of a head, the gaze of a figure, the way two objects align, the edge of an object. You can find lines in almost anything, and it's actually a problem because technically, yes, you can take a ruler and you can start connecting dots on any painting until you have a sort of a spider web. But here's the thing. Not every line is a leading line. A line only becomes a leading line when it connects to the intention of the image. That's the key. The best artists didn't just trace lines, they used the idea of the line as narrative arrows, pulling the viewer towards what matters. In this regard, there are four main kinds of lines that you'll see over and over again in master compositions. Straight lines. These kind of lines create order and stability. Diagonals. They create tension, movement, and action. Curved lines. They create grace, rhythm, and elegance. And finally, converging lines. They draw your eyes into the perspective, creating depth and point towards the focus point that's included in a perspective. Those are just ideas of leading lines and how they can be used, but of course, leading lines depend a lot on the context, so you can make them say whatever you want. So try this next. Before you start drawing or painting, ask yourself, what story does this image tell? How do I go from this focus point to the other one? If you have a storyline, how does the viewer know where to look first, then next, and where does it end? These are the lines that you need to trace using edges, drapery, alignments. Create leading lines to serve the narrative. You don't just decorate with diagonals, use lines with purpose. Now, let's talk about shapes, and we'll have completed the whole triad of composition, the 3 dimensions. So we have the point, which is 0 dimension, the line, which is 1 dimension, 1D, the shape is 2D, and after that we have the form. We're not going to talk about that. That's how you make things look 3D. So let's talk about the 2 dimensions, the shapes. Do we need geometric shapes? Aren't they kind of killing the realism? And that's the key here. Great compositions feel structured, but they also need to feel alive. And that's the dance that we're going to be talking about here. The tension between structure, the real geometry, and life, the realism of how random the shapes actually look in nature. This is the tension between geometry and organics. Geometric shapes, think like squares, rectangles, verticals, triangles, circles. They give your composition a backbone. This is where the order is. Basically, any handmade object will provide you with some type of geometry pretty easily. So you don't have to force a rectangle in your composition. Just place a frame on the background, for example, like on the background wall, like this Vermeer. Just place a window on the side. You don't have to be Mondrian and make it incredibly obvious. Simply using architecture, artificial objects will provide plenty of geometry in your composition, and it will still feel natural. What keeps it from looking completely dead and stiff is everything that breaks the order and breaks the geometry. Curves, folds, clouds, leaves, tangled hair, drapery. These are all what I call organic shapes. They are messy, they are chaotic, asymmetrical. They bring this natural side of how randomness appears to our eyes. Geometric elements like squares, triangles, verticals, they create the structure and the order, but the organic shapes, on the other hand, the curves, the random objects, the natural elements, they bring variety and chaos. This contrast is what makes the viewers want to look longer. You're creating a push and pull. One part of the brain says, oh, I get this, it's kind of stable. And the other part says, hey, what's that? This is a weird shape. That's interesting. So the real question is really, what proportion of which do you want in your composition? And it all depends on your scene. You can try this for a cityscape or an architectural scene. You can try a ratio of 70% to 80% geometric to 30% organic. Like the people walking around in the street will be the organic elements, and the architecture is going to be the geometry. For a forest, a garden, or a figure in nature, you can flip it and go for 90% organic and just let a few subtle geometric shapes or kind of straight lines anchor the chaos, like a straight log or a ruined piece of architecture in the background. When you balance the bones of geometry with the breadth of organic shapes, your painting doesn't just hold together, it breathes. The hidden geometry of great paintings isn't really hidden, it's more something felt, it's experienced. And when you understand it, you're not just painting a scene, you're guiding an experience. If you've enjoyed this journey inside the paintings, don't forget to check out the Atelier newsletter, where we share classical techniques like that every week, delivered straight in your inbox. You can also check out my Patreon, my oil painting courses, and our Discord. Until next time, my friends, joy and inspiration to you. Bye.